guarding the commands and sexual immorality. And this is all going to come from Leviticus 18. So let's kind of walk through it. And it's just a few verses, but I'm going to show you just how important this is. Now we know that Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20 are the chapters that talk about sexual immorality. And isn't it interesting how this thing starts out? So let's go to Leviticus 18. In verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, 2, speak to the Israelites and say to them, I am the Lord your God. 3, you must not do as they do in Egypt, where you used to live, and you must not do as they do in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you. Do not follow their practices. We're going to come back to this. 4, you must obey my laws and be careful to follow my decrees. I am the Lord your God. Keep my decrees and laws, for the person who obeys them will live by them. I am the Lord. People usually think, well, actually, let me get to guarding the commands first, and then I'm going to show you where this thing's really going to blow up. Now, if we review verse 3, do not do as they do in the land of Egypt. So when we go to the land, we are going to come from all the different nations on earth. There are some of us who come from Uganda, and they have some ways that they worship God in Uganda, what I'll call Ugandese. I don't know what those are. I'm not from Uganda. But those who come from Uganda have to get rid of the ways that they would worship the Creator in Uganda. Now, in other words, if there's a church practice or tradition there, get rid of that. Okay? Do it the way He tells you to do it. And if I come from China, they have some certain ways. And again, you've got the Buddhists and things like that. And that may permeate some of their culture, but you got to get rid of that culture. We know when we come to faith, one of the first things we do is having to unlearn the lies and try to get back to what the Torah actually says. And again, for those of us in the United States, we've got the Christianese as part of how we do things. But watch what it says right after the issue with Egypt in verse 3. And do not do in the land of Canaan. You must not do as they do in the land of Canaan. It doesn't say don't do as the Canaanites do. It says in the land of Canaan. Where's the land of Canaan right now? It's Israel. Don't do as they do. Don't do their practices. Okay? And it says right after that, where I'm bringing you, do not follow their practices. Their traditions, those things they have added to the Torah, get rid of. Those things they've subtracted from the Torah, get rid of. And I can even define, I believe, how those traditions are. And let me give you the best example from a friend that I talk to every single day in faith. And earlier this week, she was talking to me about, I have Teflon, which is inside of my hat brim. And she was talking to me about that and said, I'm thinking about a pair of sunglasses where I engraved the verse on it. And I thought, that is amazing. That is beautiful. Better than what I have almost, because it's really now the frontlets of your eyes. So it's perfect. Now realize what's happened. Are both of these complying? Yes, they are. Is the boxes that the Jews wear of Teflon, do they comply? Yes, they do. But realize there's multiple ways of how you can do it. How is tradition. How you do it is tradition. The issue is you do it. Okay? If you want to add a few things to it, realize you can do it, but you never say this is how you have to do it, because that's tradition. I have a way of doing Teflon. Does my way work according to the Torah? Yes, it does. Does the Jewish way work? Yes, it does. Would the sunglasses work? Yes, it does. I have Teflon, CC. How you tie them is up to you. I have mine to my belt loop, which has 4 corners. But on my shorts, and I know it's kind of crazy since it's like 9 degrees outside today, I'm actually wearing boots for the first time this year because of the snow and ice. But I have 4 corners on this top covering to my shorts for a pocket. Could I add them to that? Well, yes, I could. I could add different things that have the corners on there to comply with the Torah, and as long as I'm in compliance, the how doesn't matter. How is a tradition. And I'll get back to the one that caught me by far the most. From Churchianity, the hardest one to break for me, because we've always prayed before the meals. And after you eat, you go on your merry way. Well, Deuteronomy 8:10 tells you clearly, when you have eaten and are full, then you give thanks for the good earth it provides. Now, if I want to add some verses to that, or add some link to that prayer, could I do it? Of course I could. The how, as long as I'm complying with what it says, I'm golden. Now again, my Churchianity has come in and said you do it before the meal, and that's not what the Torah says. They've added to the Torah and said this is the way to do it, but that doesn't matter. I comply with what the Torah says. Okay, we are to jealously guard those commands. Now, this is where this is going to really blow up, because now we come into an issue of what is sexual immorality. Well, we know Leviticus 18 starts us on the sexual immorality, and what's the first thing he says of sexual immorality? Adding or subtracting from Torah. That is sexual immorality. What's the first thing we see in Leviticus 18? Where these are the sexual relations. The first thing he says, don't do as they do in Egypt or as they do in the land of Canaan. Don't follow their practices. You must obey my laws and be careful to follow my decrees, for I am the Lord your God. Keep my decrees and laws, for the person who obeys them will live by them. I am the Lord. That's the first sexual immorality statement he has. Is do it the way I'm telling you to do. Do the law, I have it, and don't add or subtract. As on tzitzit. Could you add a different color? Sure you could. Okay? Could you do your knots differently? Sure you could. The how is the tradition. The how is the practice. You can do it any way you want to, as long as you are complying with the Torah. Okay? So don't add their practices. That's where you get in trouble. That's sexual immorality. That's when he's talking about sexual immorality all through the New Testament. What do you think he's talking about? This is the first portion of what is a sexual immorality issue in Torah, and it's doing the practices of other people and how they do, or how they add or subtract from Torah. That's a sexual immorality. And we see that completely when you look at Revelation, the churches of Revelation 2 and 3. What's the first thing he's talking about? The Nicolaitans. What are the Nicolaitans? They are the people who added the worldly practices to the faith. He said he hated them. Okay? Who is Antipas? We see that in there as well. Who's Antipas? He died in the location of Satan. Well, if you research Antipas, you see that he was killed in a brass ox. Can we see golden calf here? Because I think we can. Then it starts talking about sexual immorality. Again, it brings it up from Balaam, teaching of sexual immorality. Then it brings it up in Jezebel, teaching sexual immorality. He is hammering it in your head. Do it the way do the Torah the way I've told you. And if you want to, it's the how. If I've given you freedom on how, don't say that the way you do it is the way that it's supposed to be done. Because then you're adding or maybe subtracting from Torah. And that's sexual immorality. And that is the beauty of this when you really pull in it and you see from Leviticus 18, that's what he's going with sexual immorality. Again, don't add, don't subtract. That's mostly what he's dealing with. Now, again, if you look at Acts 15 and they talk about, the sexual immorality there of this is a precursor, what they're really talking with is, and you can kind of see it, is if you're married to your aunt, well, you shouldn't be. Get out of that relationship. He's not going to keep you with sight if you're married to your mother. Get out of these practices that really most of us would never be in. But excluding that issue, then you have the fact, don't add or subtract. Just do it the way I've got it. Okay? And if I've not given you instructions on how, then your how is how you can interpret it, however you can do it. And if there are 1,000 ways, then there are 1,000 ways. If there's 50, there's 50. If there's 5, there's 5. Are there multiple ways of tying the tzitzit? Of course there are. Is anyone wrong who's doing the tzitzit? If we're doing it on the four corners, if they're complying with what the Torah says, then certain hows are just traditions. They're just traditions. And that's what we're to worry about. And that's how we guard the commands. We guard them by saying, we do only what they say. And as long as it doesn't say on the how, and again, when you do the tzitzit, it has to be tied. It should have one blue cord. Okay? So if you've got 2, well, that's a problem. Okay? But if you've got 1 of those blue, then you're pretty much, I think you're okay if you've tied it to 4 corners. So those hows are the traditions. Those are the things of sexual immorality. And you wouldn't have thought tzitzit could be a factor of sexual immorality, but it can be. You wouldn't think tefillin is sexual immorality, but it clearly, he's got it listed here in Leviticus 18. That's the first key to sexual immorality. Guard those commands. Guard them. With everything you have, guard them. And so I hope I've kind of brought that out for you. And you can see and again, once you see that Leviticus 18, which is a sexual immorality, once you see that it's guarding the commands the way it is, then there's not an issue. You can see Revelation 2 and 3 and all these other times very easy about what sexual immorality is and what they're talking about. It makes it really beautifully easy. You can't unsee it once you've seen it. So, and the only thing I want to add to this is when you see sexual immorality, what I think of is sleeping with the whore of Babylon. In Revelation, the Sunday church. The whore, because, that church has all the spawns of all these little Sunday churches all came out of one. They're all offspring of the whore. So stay away from it. And that's that mixing of I'm going to do it, that golden calf worship. You're still in the Baal worship when you start it. So that's that sexual immorality he's talking about. It's not the things that we think of, which are the things realistically mostly from the flesh, of being with your aunt or something. He said don't do it. It's kind of easy. He's not going to keep harping on that one. He's going to harp on the issue of don't degrade my Torah. Don't add to it. Don't subtract from it. Don't start saying I'm going to do the worship that I say to do on Sabbath and I'll do it on another day. Don't do the Christmas and stuff. That's where you're really mixing. That's where the real problem comes in.